Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, publisher and editor of Native News Online. June 1st, 1868 is a time that the Navajo celebrate years later, and they call it Treaty Days. And so with me today, we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Mark Charles, who is Diné, and he is a co-author of Unsettling Truths, done extensive research on the Doctrine of Discovery, and he was a guest lecturer at the speaker series at the Navajo Nation Museum, I guess the last day of May. And so welcome, Mark. How are you today?
Hey, Yate, Levi. It's good to see you again. I just actually literally flew in from Winter Rock yesterday. I spoke at the Navajo Nation Museum yesterday on the 31st of May and flew home last night, got home about 3 o'clock in the morning, slept in a little bit, and now ready to go again for another day. So,
well, thank you for joining us, even under those circumstances. It's always good to see you. Always good to see you. And to our viewers, Mark and I, when I fly to DC, often he lives there. He and I will get coffee, lunch, or something, and spend some time together. Last year we spent a couple of days at the Kennedy Center, and when the Native Indigenous people celebration was taking place, so it was fun. And so, hey, Mark, tell our viewers more about what happened June 1st, 1868.
Yeah, well, before I do that, let me just quickly introduce myself in a respectful way. So, Yate, Mark Charles, Yinashia, Sinbake Diné Nishle, the Tohiglini Bashichin, Sinbake Diné Dashiche, the Toruchini Dashinella. In our Navajo culture, we are matrilineal and we introduce ourselves by our 4 clans, and we identify ourselves by our mother's mother. So my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, which is why I say Sinbake Diné. Loosely translated, that means I'm from the Wooden Shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Sinbake Diné. And then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Toruchitni, which is the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I'm here in DC, as we said earlier. In Navajo, we say we're in Washington. And these are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. But I was very honored. So the curator of the museum is a good friend of mine. His name is Manny Manuelito, and our Manny Manuelito is his full name. But he and I have been knowing each other for a long time, back to when our kids went to Deneba Ulta, the Navajo immersion school, together. And on 1868, June 1st of 1868, is when our nation signed our treaty with the U.S. government. And this is the treaty that brought us back from Bosque Redondo. So in 1863 and 1864, the U.S. government literally rounded up our Navajo people, marched 10,000 of us down to a reservation, Fort Sumner in Bosque Redondo, kind of in the southeastern in the territory of New Mexico, and kept us imprisoned there. Literally a quarter of our people died while we were imprisoned at what I refer to as a death camp.
About how many people passed away or died there?
Yeah, so 2,300 of the 10,000 who were imprisoned there. And so, it was a very horrific event. And it was the Treaty of 1868 that brought us back to a segment of our traditional lands of Dinete. And so every year on June 1st, we have what we call our Treaty Days, where we commemorate this treaty and we remember the hardship we went through and the long walk. And my friend Manny called me a few weeks ago and said, hey, we want to do a speaker series on the long walk for Treaty Days this year. And he had read my book, and he and I had talked about it, in my book, Unsettling Truths, right? The ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. Chapters 9 and 10 go in depth into the adage that says the victors write the history. If you win a war, you're the one who gets to write about the war. And we make the comparison. We say, so imagine if Nazi Germany wins World War II, right? How would their historians have recorded the legacy of Adolf Hitler?
Wow.
And then we look at, well, had they won World War II, how would the Nazi historians have recorded the Holocaust, right? So Hitler would have been their greatest hero ever. And the Holocaust, what Holocaust? They have deniers today. Imagine if they won the war, right? There was no Holocaust. And so we take that adage of the victors write the history. We note that the United States of America has never lost a war that matters. We've never been invaded. We've never given up large tracts of land. We've never been disarmed. We've never had a regime change. We've never borne the scorn of the global community. We've won every major military conflict we've been in. As a result, we have written our own history, the United States of America, for 250 years. And because of that, just like how the Nazis would have portrayed their genocidal leader, we actually know nothing about Abraham Lincoln. And so chapters 9 and 10 go through the writings, the sayings, the speeches, the policies, the programs, the actions, the executive orders of Abraham Lincoln. Chapter 9 demonstrates that he was a blatant, unapologetic, self-proclaimed white supremacist. And chapter 10...
Now, hold on, Mark. Let me interrupt. That must be shocking to some people.
It really is, right? And just so the way I bring people into this, right, is Lincoln steps onto the political stage in 1858. He's running for the Senate in Illinois against Judge Stephen Douglas. Mm-hmm. And they're in the debates, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And in these debates, they're not like today where they have a 30-second slot here and a minute long here. They have like 20 to 30 minutes to give a speech. And they have alternating speeches throughout the debate. And so there was
no live TV.
So one of these early debates, right, Lincoln is introducing himself because it's known already that he is against the institution of chattel slavery. But when he introduces himself, he says, I have no intention of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor allowing them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. Wow. He said there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races from living together in terms of social and political equality. And as long as they must remain together, there must be the distinction between superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, believe that the superior position belongs to the white race. Those are the words of Abraham Lincoln in 1858.
That's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy.
Well, and so when you ask why would you come out and say this, Lincoln? Like what would motivate you to make this bold of a statement? Mm-hmm. Right? So in the 2022 midterm elections, it was just a few months earlier that the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade.
Yes.
And so the midterm elections was all about where do you stand on the right of the woman to choose and the value of the unborn fetus? That was the debate, by and large, of the midterm elections of 2022. Well, in 1857, the year before the midterm elections of 1858, the Supreme Court had another landmark case, and that was the Dred Scott decision, where they ruled that people of color, especially African Americans, were not covered by our founding documents. The Constitution, the Doctrine of Discovery, did not apply to people of color. And so the debate of the 1858 midterm election was, what do you think about our founding documents applying to people of color? And Abraham Lincoln was stating very clearly there that he agreed with Dred Scott.
Wow.
And so, again, this is just the first of many things he did throughout his entire presidency, where he made it very clear that he did not have a value for Black lives. And even when you look at the 13th Amendment, which most people think abolishes slavery, right? It actually doesn't. If you read the 13th Amendment, what it says is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party has been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. The 13th Amendment doesn't abolish slavery. It redefines and codifies it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And so, again, this was the dilemma of Lincoln, right? He wanted to end chattel slavery, but he had no intention of making voters or jurors of Black people or letting them participate in the social and political life of the country. And so the question is, well, once we emancipate them, what do we do with them?
Mm-hmm.
They debated sending them back to Africa. I mean, there was all kinds of things on the table. His conclusion was, let's keep enslavement legal in our criminal justice system. So on the whim of a judge, a whim of a police officer, the whim of a jury, we can incarcerate them and have them out of society again. And to this day, today, the United States of America has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and we incarcerate people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. And so again, this goes back directly to the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. There is a quote hanging at the Lincoln Memorial. It's a marble plaque, 4.5 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide, etched in this plaque. In 1862, the New York Tribune wrote a scathing op-ed about Abraham Lincoln because he had promised to emancipate enslaved peoples. And they were writing in 1862 that, hey, you need to emancipate enslaved peoples right away. Now, Abraham Lincoln was concerned because there were 4 northern states that allowed enslavement. They had not seceded from the Union. And he was afraid if he came out with the Emancipation Proclamation, which was already written, it was in his desk, but he was afraid if he came out with it, he would lose the political support of the slave owners. And so in response to this op-ed, Abraham Lincoln responded back with a letter, and he said, my primary object is to preserve the Union. He said, I am not doing this to free the slaves, right? My primary object in this struggle is not to save or destroy slavery, it's to preserve the Union. And if I can preserve the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could preserve it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. His response to saying emancipate enslaved peoples was, I don't give a crap about Black lives. I'm doing this to save the Union, and that's hanging at the Lincoln Memorial. It's not lamenting this is his attitude. It's celebrating, saying, look at how much President Lincoln loved the Union. This statement is about how much he doesn't give a crap about Black lives. He is only concerned about preserving the Union. So, yeah, it's when you look at what he said, what he did, it's his white supremacy is blatant, it's unapologetic, and he proclaims it himself over and over and over again.
Well, let me ask you, because you travel the country quite a bit, and do you get pushback from non-native, I'll just say Caucasian people who Abraham Lincoln is their hero? He is like, I think for the last several presidential, those historians will do that. Who's the greatest president ever?
Yeah.
They all list Abraham Lincoln as the most.
Both the left and the right love Lincoln, right? President Obama, our first African-American president, took his oath of office with his hand on the Lincoln Bible.
Wow.
The Republicans love to remind people we are the party of Lincoln.
Yeah.
Right. Our nation absolutely loves bipartisan.
So what kind of pushback do you get in audiences from audiences?
So this is what's fascinating, because the way I frame the argument, both in my lectures and in the book, is I don't make an academic argument, right? I'm not quoting historians, and I'm not quoting experts on Lincoln. I quote Lincoln. Had I just quoted experts on Lincoln or quoted historians, I would have had a great academic debate. But because I quote Lincoln, I actually make people deal with what he said. Mm-hmm. And so one of the greatest things, so this is on our book, on the back of our book, we have an endorsement by a Civil War historian named Mark Knoll. And I want to read to you what he wrote. Why should I endorse a book when I do not agree with some of its historical judgments? Answer, for the same reason you should read it. Charles and Raw attack a precarious principle, the Doctrine of Discovery. They review an evil history of the United States treatment of Native Americans. They challenge a persistent stereotype, American exceptionalism, and psychoanalyze white America in denial about the nation's history. the entire book, even when you think things could be evaluated differently, will make you think and think hard about critically important guidelines or questions of Christian doctrine, American history, and God's standards of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I mean, I love that endorsement, because here's a guy, and I am nearly positive, I haven't spoken to him personally, he's a Civil War historian. I am quite certain his disagreement with us is in our analysis of Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he says, holy crap, the way Mark, I don't agree with their methodology, but the way they did it
Mm-hmm.
makes you wrestle with who these things were, who these people were, and what they did, and who we are as a nation. And so the way I lay it out, right? I lay it out so clearly. I quote Lincoln, I show his policies, I show the results of the things he did. And at the end, you may not like me, right? You may not like what I said, but it's almost impossible to say I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because again, I'm quoting Lincoln.
Yeah.
I'm not quoting something else. I'm not taking, I'm like, this is what he said. We have to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, you know, in my own personal history, I'll go back when I was in second grade, right? So it was shortly after beginning second grade, and I have a pretty good memory, but I had a teacher named Miss Snow.
Yeah.
She had that previous summer toured Lincoln's log cabin in Kentucky. And then, of course, she was down in Springfield, Illinois, where he had the, you know, he had been in the legislature down there, and he had a home in Springfield. And so I have to tell you, all year long, it was nothing but praise of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
So I guess as I'll say it this way, little Potawatomi boy, I grew up admiring Abraham Lincoln.
Oh,
I know when I read your book, and you've actually written some editorials, op-eds for Native News Online that pushed back on Lincoln. And I was like astounded when I first started reading it, because you believe what you learn in school.
Yeah.
And that's so tie it to the Navajo lecture series.
Yeah. So chapter 9 lays out his white supremacist attitude, specifically regarding Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 10 deals with his policies towards Native peoples.
Yes.
So in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signs two bills. The spring and summer of 1862, he signs the Pacific Railway Act, which allocates the land and the resources essentially to complete manifest destiny. The Trans-Mountain Railway had reached Omaha, Nebraska, and there's actually three routes. There's a northern, a southern, and a central route.
Mm-hmm.
And he signed this bill allocating the land and the resources to get these railways all the way to the Pacific Ocean.
Mm.
He also signs the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act allocates 160 acres
Mm-hmm.
to anyone willing to go west and homestead for 5 years. Over the next 2.5 years, starting with the Dakota War of 1862
Mm-hmm.
and the hanging of the Dakota 38,
Yes.
the Bear River Massacre of the Shoshone in northern Colorado and in northern Utah and southern Idaho in January of 1863, and then going on to the removal of the Dakota and Winnebago from Minnesota into the Dakota territories after they nullify their treaties. The U.S. government nullifies the treaties. And then we have the long walk of the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache in the southern states. And then we have in 1863 and 1864. And then we have the Sand Creek Massacre in 1860 in November 29 of 1864. A week later, January 6th of 1864, a week after the Sand Creek Massacre, Abraham Lincoln is giving his annual address, essentially his State of the Union. And in that address, he clearly states that we have begun this process of completing manifest destiny, and he is very confident we're going to make it all the way through to the other side. A week after the fourth of these massacres, he's now confident. Yeah, we're going to complete this.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to make it where, we're set about this with a vigor that gives us assurance of its success. And so that's telling in and of itself. And unfortunately, I can't share this graphic here, but I have a graphic. Actually, I can share it if you want. If you give me just a second, I can. So it's after the hanging of the Dakota 38 and the removal of the Dakota from and the Winnebago from Minnesota in 1862, the Bear River Massacre of the Shoshone in northern Utah and southern Idaho, that massacre in 1863, the Long Walk of the Navajo and Mescalero Apache in the Southwest in 1863 and 1864, and then the Sand Creek Massacre on November 29 of 1864, which is the Cheyenne and Arapaho. Now, the Sand Creek Massacre happened on November 29 of 1864, and 1 week later, on December 6 of 1864, Abraham Lincoln was giving his State of the State address. And in his address, this is what he said. And let me just bring this up for you a second. Hold on just a second. He said 1.5 million acres were entered under the Homestead Law, and the great enterprise of connecting the Atlantic with the Pacific states by railway and telegraph lines has been entered upon with a vigor that gives assurance of success. So you have to ask, what made him so confident? What made him so confident that they were going to get all the way across from the Atlantic to the Pacific? Why was these 4 massacres so instrumental in making sure that this was going to happen? So let's pull up a map, right? So here's a map of the country, including the Transcontinental Railway, and there's 3 primary routes. The central route, which had reached Omaha, Nebraska, had to go through Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and came out near San Francisco. There was a northern route from Duluth, Minnesota, through North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, and comes out near Seattle, and a southern route going through the territory of New Mexico, the territory of Arizona, and comes out near Los Angeles. And when we place these 4 atrocities on this map, where we have the removal of the Winnebago and Dakota up in Minnesota, we have the Bear River Massacre, which literally was very, very close to where the Golden Spike was eventually laid, which was the spike that connected the railway coming from the east and the west. We have the Long Walk in the south, right along the southern route, and we have the Sand Creek Massacre right along the route going through Colorado. And it's very clear, once you see this, that within 2.5 years of signing the Pacific Railway Act, Abraham Lincoln has essentially ethnically cleansed the northern, the central, and the southern routes of the Transcontinental Railway.
In order to accomplish this, he had to get rid of Indians,
making him one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history. So in our treaty, in the Navajo Nation Treaty of 1868, Section 9 of that treaty, what it says, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but what that says is, it says the Navajo people will not oppose any current or future construction of railroads going through these lands. We were not allowed to come back to our land until we promised to not obstruct the construction of the Transcontinental Railway. So what was fascinating, right? So the other day when I spoke at the Long Walk Speaker Series, and I presented this research to our Navajo people on the day when we're commemorating our treaty with the U.S. government, and I'm laying out, right, and I have other, I can show, there's one other thing, let me show you this too. I'll go back to I'll share my screen here, because there's one other thing I want you to see here that's vitally important about all of this. So let's look at these executive orders, right? So here's the executive order pertaining to the creation of the Bosque Redondo Reserve. And when we look at this more closely, we see that on January 15 of 1864, the Bosque Redondo Reservation, where our people were brought in the Long Walk, where a quarter of our people died while imprisoned in this death camp, that place was approved by none other than Abraham Lincoln. I found this document in the United States Library of Congress.
These are some very, very horrific revelations that you are bringing forth, Mark. Wow.
And so when we look at this history, and one of the things that I did this week when I presented this to my Navajo people and I laid this out, and first of all, as Navajo people, when we think about the Long Walk, we tend to blame the Long Walk on General Carleton, who was the general who gave the order, or on Kit Carson, who was one of the army captains who went through and did these atrocities, right? They burned our villages and captured our people and marched us down there. That's who we blame the Long Walk on, General Carleton or people like Kit Carson. And in laying out this research for my people, I was able to place the blame directly on Abraham Lincoln. This was part of his policy. This was in connection with the bills that he signed. We already know he's a white supremacist and doesn't give a crap about the value of lives of people of color. And now we see he is willing to do even horrific acts of ethnic cleansing and genocide in order to complete manifest destiny. And it's the map, right? That map that makes this thing so clear when we see exactly what he did and where he was going. And when I presented this to our people at the Navajo Nation Museum, one of the responses I got back very frequently, especially from some of our elders, is I always thought we were brought down to Bosque Redondo because we were always creating so much war, right? We were warring with the settlers and with the government, right? We were being savages. And they said, but to see that we were not brought to Bosque Redondo because we were causing war, but we were brought because the country was trying to complete its own manifest destiny. And I got several comments like that yesterday after I presented this. I'm like, how freeing that must be for our people, right? To think, yeah, we endured this tragedy because we were too savage, right? The Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages whose only known rule of warfare is the complete destruction of all ages, sexes, and religions, right? That's what it says about us. And that's what we believe, which is why we were sent to Fort Sumner, almost like we deserved it.
Yeah, it's almost like when people are in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
They're actually made to feel like they're responsible.
We were responsible in some way.
Becoming the victim.
Or at least it's justified in some sense.
Wow.
And to show this to that, no, this was a part of this nation trying to complete its own self-proclaimed manifest destiny. I wasn't even expecting that, but when I saw it was having that effect on our people, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so glad I had a chance to present this research.
Well, Mark, we're basically out of time, but I will tell you this. We will post a link to your lecture at the Navajo Nation Museum that you made on May 31st. And this is remarkable, fascinating history told from a different perspective. And as I'm sitting here, I still, as I referenced a little while ago, Miss Snow, my second grade teacher, who went to visit Lincoln Land, so to speak, land of Lincoln, right? And really impressed upon impressionable minds when I was in second grade, the love, the heroism, the hero that Lincoln is or should be to all Americans. And so it worked for all this time, but thank you for shedding such great light. And I promise you, I'll bring you back, and we'll bring you back on Native Bidaské because we like in-depth conversations, and you certainly have done your research and you have done your homework on this. So chi miigwech to you.
Well, thank you, Levi. And if people would like to get a signed copy of my book, Unsettling Truths, again, it's chapters 9 and 10 that go into this whole history on Lincoln. But the whole book is very similar in what it lays out. They can get signed copies of my book from my website at wirelesshogan.com, and we can share that link as well. But yeah, it's such a I love your work, Levi. I love the way that you're bringing out the news for Indian country, and we've known each other for over a decade, and I highly respect the work that you're doing.
Likewise.
I'm honored to be here with you today, and thank you for giving me a chance to share some of this conversation with you.
I promise you we'll have you back. So maybe we'll have you back before Thanksgiving. You can talk about the Thanksgiving story.
I would love to.
All right. Chimi Gwich. And to our viewers, thank you one more time for tuning into another edition of Native Bidaské. We'll be back next week with another newsmaker in Indian country. In the meantime, have a safe week and enjoy the summer.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chimi Gwech.